If your learners tune out halfway through your training, this usually isn't a motivation problem. Just because the information is important doesn't mean people will automatically pay attention. Attention needs a reason to care, a path to follow, and something to do along the way. So if your modules are accurate but you can feel people zoning out, I'm going to show you a simple 3-part structure that helps fix that. Because a lot of online training opens with a vague objective, gives learners no real reason to care, then asks them to sit through slide after slide with nothing to do. At that point, the module is basically saying, please stay engaged through willpower. And willpower is not a great course design strategy. In this video, I'll show you how to open your module with a clear payoff so learners know why they should care, how to break long passive lessons into smaller active steps that keep them involved, and how to use a simple story structure so the training feels like something they're moving through instead of something they're just trying to finish. But before we get into those 3 parts, I think we have to go way back. Back before screens, before slide decks, before LMS platforms, before somebody decided every training module needed a tiny gray next button in the corner. I'm talking about people sitting around a fire, looking up at the night sky. Humans have always looked up at the stars and tried to make sense of what we were seeing. And for most of human history, we did that through stories. People weren't sitting around the fire listing bullet points about the sky. They weren't saying, Objective 1, identify major visible constellations. They were telling stories. Stories about the stars, weather, animals, danger, food, seasons, and how to survive. Those stories mattered because they gave information a shape. They gave people a reason to listen, a path to follow, and something to remember. And that's the part we sometimes forget when we design e-learning. Learners are not little information processors sitting behind a screen waiting for content to be poured into their brains. They're people. And people learn better when information has a shape, a beginning, a path, a little bit of tension, and a reason to keep going. That doesn't mean that every module needs to be dramatic. You don't need a hero's journey for a 5-minute compliance lesson. But you do need structure. Because if the lesson feels like a pile of information, learners will treat it like something to get through. But if it feels like a path, they're much more likely to stay with it. So the first part of that path starts before you teach anything. You have to orient the learner. This is where a lot of modules lose people right away. They open with something like, Welcome to this module on data security policies. And that's accurate. It tells the learner the topic, but it doesn't answer the question they're actually asking. Why should I care about this? And where is this going? Especially in workplace learning, people are often taking the training because they have to. So if the opening is vague, their brain starts looking for the fastest way out. That's when the next button becomes the most interesting thing on the screen. So the opening should do 3 things quickly. First, name the practical payoff. What will they be able to do, avoid, recognize, or decide by the end? Second, show the roadmap. Give them a quick sense of the path they're about to follow. And third, reduce uncertainty. Point them toward what matters so they're not trying to figure that out while they're learning. So instead of welcome to this module on data security policies, you might say, by the end of this lesson, you'll know how to spot the 3 most common data security mistakes, what to do when you see one, and how to avoid putting private information at risk. Now the learner knows what they're getting, why it matters, and where the lesson is going. I saw this constantly as a teacher. Students did better when they knew the purpose of the lesson, the skill they were working toward, and what success looked like. And yes, adult learners are not 8th graders, but we all like to know why we're being asked to pay attention. So that's the first part. Start with the payoff and the roadmap. Because if learners do not know why the lesson matters, Most will not create that reason themselves. Give them the reason right away. But even with a strong opening, you can still lose people if the next 10 minutes feel like one long information dump. That's where the second part of the structure comes in. Break long, passive lessons into active chunks. Because the problem is not just that lessons are too long. The bigger problem is that they're too long without asking the learner to do anything. If someone watches 10 straight minutes of narration and slides, the course is asking them to stay engaged through willpower again. But if every few minutes they have to answer a question, make a decision, or apply what they just heard, the lesson changes. Now, they're not just watching, they're participating. And the interaction does not have to be fancy. It can be a true-false question, a multiple-choice decision, a quick "what would you do next" scenario, or a short pause to identify the most important idea so far. The point is to turn the training from a stream of information into a sequence of small mental actions. I saw this clearly during the COVID shutdowns. I used a tool that let me add pause points to a video. At certain moments, the video would stop, and students had to answer a question, make a prediction, or explain their thinking before moving on. That small change made the video less passive. They knew they were going to respond, so they watched with a purpose. That same idea applies to quizzes. Instead of one big test at the end, use frequent targeted checkpoints tied to specific skills. Because the goal is not to catch learners at one perfect moment. The goal is to help them show understanding. A quiz does not have to be a final judgment or a compliance gate. It can be part of the learning process. Short, low-pressure checkpoints help learners see progress, notice gaps, and stay involved. So don't just divide a long course into smaller pieces. Design each piece as a focused learning step. Give the learner something to do before you ask them to move on. And once learners know why they should care, where they're going, and what they're doing along the way, there's one more piece that gives the whole lesson momentum. Use story structure as the instructional spine. And I don't mean every lesson needs a cute anecdote or some big dramatic plot. I mean the lesson should have a shape that feels natural to follow, a situation, a problem, a decision, a consequence, and a resolution. That's what story structure does. It gives information movement. So instead of opening a compliance lesson with "company policy requires all employees to follow data security procedures," you could begin with, imagine you receive an email that looks like it came from your manager. It asks you to open an attached file before the end of the day. What do you do next? Now the learner has a role. There's a situation. There's a little bit of tension. And the policy is no longer just a rule floating in space. It's connected to a real decision. That is the difference between story structure and dumping information on the screen. Story structure gives the learner a reason to keep moving. They want to know what happens next, what choice they should make, and what the consequence will be. But this is important. Use story structure, not story clutter. The story should serve the learning goal. If it gets too elaborate, too entertaining, or too disconnected from the actual skill, it becomes another distraction. So keep it simple. Put the learner in a situation. Give them a problem to notice. Let them make a decision. Then show the consequence. That's enough. You're not trying to write a movie. You're trying to make the lesson easier to follow. But one thing can quietly weaken all three parts of this structure, even when the flow is strong: the language. The learner may know why they should care. The lesson may be broken into manageable chunks. There may be checkpoints, a clear situation, and a decision to make. But if the wording sounds like it came straight out of a policy document, a technical manual, or a subject matter expert's brain at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon, you can still lose people. And I say that with love because subject matter experts are incredibly important. They know the content, the details, and what has to be accurate. But they often speak from the expert side of the room. The learner is standing on the other side. So part of the job is translating expert language into learner-friendly language. Not dumbing it down, making it usable. Instead of saying, participants must demonstrate compliance with institutional data governance protocols, you might say, you need to know how to handle private data safely and what steps to follow if something looks wrong. Same idea, much easier to process. And that matters because every extra bit of friction gives the learner another reason to check out. So don't let the wording undo the structure. Give learners a reason to care. Give them a path to follow. Give them something to do. Then make sure the language sounds like it was written for a real person. And once your module is structured in a way that keeps learners engaged, the next question is how to keep the production process moving without letting quality slip, especially when voiceover is part of the project. So click right here, and I'll show you how to speed up voiceover turnaround without losing quality and the workflow secrets that make that possible.